Ethical diligence or gatekeeping. So I'm talking about vulnerable populations. And without further ado, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of Queensland and other Australian states and territories on which we're meeting, and pay my respects to all First Nations Australians. I'd like to acknowledge the Red Rose Foundation research participants, of which I'll be talking, and acknowledge my colleagues on the study, Dr. Heather Lovatt and Dr. Nicola Cheen, who could not be here. An overview. I'm going to discuss the factors that influence the agency that those with lived experience drew on when making decisions about participating in research interviews we undertook. I'll present findings regarding cognitive, motivational, affective and selection processes that they used for those involved, and discuss the considerations for researchers and HRECs regarding engagement lived experience. Now, the lived experience I'm talking about were 16 women who had survived strangulation within abusive intimate partner relationships. They'd all left the abusive relationship, but were receiving support from the Red Rose Foundation because of complex and ongoing impacts from the abuse. So they were very a traumatised cohort of women, very courageous ones too. The study was part of a larger one exploring women's experience of the service system, actually, responding to events of strangulation and what responses they had. And at the end of the interview, we specifically asked participants about their interview experience to assess the benefits associated with their involvement. And we really did this specifically because we'd done a lot of work with lived experience, and I'm referring to domestic and family or sexual violence participants, and had noted that there were, they talked about sometimes feeling empowered or finding it a useful process. So we really wanted to unpack that by specifically asking how they had found it. So first of all, the cognitive processes that we identified, reflections from the study really highlight how they process their decision-making to participate in the interview. And it confirms that people can sort of self-assess themselves and set their goals. So they had self-efficacy that enabled them to concentrate on achieving goals and overcoming risks, as compared to possibly becoming stagnant in a loop of fear, as has previously been suggested. And there's two other quotes there. So one, Jeanette shows a fairly high level of self-efficacy, and she said, look, it's easy for me to just do this. And Jessica sort of spoke about how she compartmentalized and compartmentalized and said, look, this is how I cope. So they each described how they would cope with the process. Now, having decided that they wanted to participate and having that cognitive process that says, I can do this, their motivations were very much, and this came through and has always come through very strongly, you know, I'd like my story to make a difference. Amy talking about changing or saving someone's life, and Wendy with talking about raising awareness, and people need to be brought justice, they really do. And that altruistic wish to make a difference is so strong, and they want their experience to not be in vain, as some of them said, and to really build on how their stories could make meaningful change. The strong statements then fit with a feminist narrative that has long sort of encompass that there can be empowerment of survivors through participation in research if undertaken in an informed, sensitive, and as the previous speaker said, in a trauma-informed way, but recognising that survivors don't want their stories silenced. They've often been silenced, and this is an opportunity. The effective processes, so they could understand and regulate their emotional responses when it came to the interviews. And they'd really thought this through in making informed consent. It's very important that the information sheets that they receive about the research allows them to make informed decisions, that they're given choice about a number of things, the voluntary nature, of course, as per any ethics, the voluntary nature that they can withdraw, but also giving choice as to how the interviews are held, times, dates, mechanisms, and how the research will be used, and identifying support mechanisms and allowing them to have support before, during, or after. So they come into hopefully a safe environment and can manage then the risk of re-traumatization. The interviewer role. Now, this is really important about, I've said about the effective processes, because it can be enriched on that impact of that interviewer and researcher. So when we asked them about the process, they talked about empathetic, respectful, I like the process. It's been good. And the other thing was seeing that you understand the things that I'm saying has certainly helped. So in this role, when we are interviewing or researching with lived experience, we do have, all researchers are domestic and family sexual violence informed, trauma informed, and in this case, because it involves strangulation, we'd actually all sat in a 2-day training session with the Red Rose Foundation on strangulation. So we understood some of the impacts, and it equipped us to go in a more informed way and in a more equal partnership, so that we could really recognise, I suppose, some reactions, or when to stop, when to offer support, when to slow down. The selection processes. Despite the trauma, we would argue, and the survivors would argue, I believe, that they can self-select what activities, environments they want to engage with. And people with good self-efficacy tackle challenges rather than avoid them. And traditionally, survivors of domestic and family violence, researchers said, well, they've got relatively low levels of self-efficacy and agency because of the experience. We found in this research and others that the survivors had really quite good self-efficacy and knew what they wanted to do, had strategies, should they be re-triggered. I would say that no one had talked about or has talked about being re-triggered or negatively traumatized.
Heather, we've just got 2 minutes left. So
excellent. So 2 more quotes there, and I think we're nearly there. So the key findings. Basically, survivors of abuse understand their vulnerability to further traumatization and have the self-efficacy to carry out what we would argue, their own personal risk assessments about being involved with research. The discourse surrounding vulnerable populations is potentially too fragile to give informed consent or participate safely, and research being inherently or re-traumatizing or harmful, we believe needs to change with a broader foundation. And research and HRECs need to recognise the evidence and be careful not to unduly take a paternalistic or gatekeeping stance that may further silence voices that want to be heard. Now, I've talked about, you would gather that there was a feminist approach taken. I've talked about the informed nature, and comprehensive information and choice was provided. The usefulness of what we did, this was a document that was written with and for the participants, and there was a closed launch with a government minister, and they handed the booklet to the minister. So again, I think it's really following through about the social impact as well, and for these women, that was so important. The implications. So I've advocated we need to understand the foundations of agency and recognise and be alert to self-efficacy or conversely diminished self-efficacy, and for committees to review research proposals with due consideration given to researchers who can demonstrate that deeper understanding about participant safety, wellbeing, support. And those are some of the references if people would like. And so that's